The water rushed through the Silver Bell mine with the fury of a broken dam, and Florence Garrison knew in that instant that everything she had worked for was drowning in the darkness below. She stood at the mouth of the mine on that bitter November morning in 1883, her hands pressed against the rough wooden frame as miners stumbled out coughing and gasping, their faces streaked with mud and terror. The flooding had come without warning during the night shift, when an underground spring broke through the weakened shaft walls. And now the mine that had employed half of Yankton, South Dakota, was filling with water faster than any pump could drain it. Florence had never worked inside the mine herself, but her entire future had depended on it. At 22 years old, she had saved every penny from her job keeping the company books, planning to buy the small cottage on the edge of town where she could finally have something of her own. Her father had died in a mining accident 3 years prior, and her mother had passed the winter after from pneumonia, leaving Florence alone in a world that did not treat unmarried women kindly. The mine office had been her sanctuary, the neat columns of numbers her only reliable companions, and the steady wage her lifeline. Now the owner, Samuel Pritchard, emerged from the crowd of miners with his face ashen and his shoulders slumped in defeat. Florence knew what was coming before he even opened his mouth. The Silver Bell mine was finished. The cost of pumping out the water and repairing the damage would exceed anything the struggling operation could afford. Yankton's primary employer was closing its doors, and with it went Florence's wages, her savings plan, and any hope of the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. "Miss Garrison," Pritchard said, his voice heavy with regret, "I am sorry, truly sorry, but I cannot keep you on. There is no office to manage when there is no mine to run." Florence nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She had known this moment would come, had felt it in her bones the instant she heard the shouts and saw the water streaming from the mine entrance. She collected her final wages, a pitiful sum that would barely last her 2 months if she was careful, and walked back to the boarding house where she rented a single room on the 3rd floor. The November wind cut through her wool coat, and the sky hung low and gray over the Missouri River that wound through the town. Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, was waiting in the parlor when Florence returned. The woman's expression held a familiar blend of sympathy and practicality that Florence had come to recognize in the faces of people about to deliver bad news. "I heard about the mine," Mrs. Patterson said, wringing her hands in her apron. "I am sorry, dear, but I cannot keep your room without payment. I have a family wanting it next week, and with times being what they are, I need the income." Florence felt the ground shifting beneath her feet once more, another piece of her carefully constructed life crumbling away. She had 1 week to find employment and new lodging, or she would be out on the streets as winter approached the Dakota Territory. The town had few opportunities for respectable women, and with the mine closing, half the businesses that depended on the miners' wages would likely follow. That night, Florence lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the window panes. She had no family to turn to, no prospects for marriage, and no skills beyond bookkeeping and basic arithmetic. The future that had seemed so clear just yesterday had vanished as completely as if it had been swallowed by the flooded mine. The next morning, Florence walked through Yankton's muddy streets, stopping at every store and business to inquire about work. The answers were all the same polite refusals and sympathetic headshakes. By afternoon, she found herself at the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. A large ranch house sat in the distance, and closer to the road stood a sturdy barn and several corrals where horses moved in graceful circles. A man was working with one of the horses, a tall, rangy animal that seemed determined to test his patience. The man moved with a fluid confidence that came from years in the saddle, his rope work precise and unhurried. He wore a battered hat pulled low against the sun, and his clothes were dusty from work. Florence watched him for a moment, hesitating before she gathered her courage and approached the fence. "Excuse me," she called out. "I am looking for work, any kind of work." The man turned, and Florence got her first clear look at him. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after rain, somewhere between brown and green. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a slightly dangerous appearance that was softened by the genuine curiosity in his expression. "You are looking for ranch work?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of surprise. He secured the horse and walked toward the fence, moving with an easy grace that suggested he was far more comfortable on his feet than most cowboys she had met. "I am looking for any honest work," Florence replied, lifting her chin. "I can read and write, keep books, manage accounts. I worked at the mine office until yesterday." "I heard about the flooding," he said, his expression growing somber. "Bad business, that. Lost good men to that mine over the years." He studied her for a long moment, and Florence forced herself not to look away. "Name is Grant Keller. I run this place with my brother, though he is up north buying cattle at the moment. Florence Garrison." "Miss Garrison, I am not sure what kind of work you are expecting to find at a horse ranch, but I do not need a bookkeeper. We keep our accounts simple, and I handle them myself." He paused, seeming to consider something. "However, I do have a problem that someone with your particular skills might help solve." Hope flickered in Florence's chest. "What kind of problem?" Grant Keller removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, which was longer than was fashionable but suited him. "My brother and I started breeding and training horses 2 years ago. We have built a decent reputation for quality stock, and we have more buyers than we can handle. The problem is, we are spending so much time training and traveling to deliver horses that we are not keeping proper records. We have no idea which bloodlines are producing the best animals, which buyers owe us money, or what our actual expenses are. We are making money, but we are doing it blind." Florence's mind immediately began organizing the problem into neat categories. This was exactly the kind of challenge she understood. You need someone to create a proper accounting system and track your breeding records. "More than that," Grant said. "We need someone who can help manage the business side of things so my brother and I can focus on the horses. But I have to be honest with you, Miss Garrison. This is a ranch. It is dusty and dirty, and the hours are long. The work would not just be sitting at a desk. You would need to be in the barns, counting stock, checking on animals, dealing with buyers who are often rough men. It is not genteel work." "I grew up in Yankton, Mr. Keller. My father was a miner. I understand what hard work means, and I am not afraid of dust or dirt." Florence met his gaze squarely. "I need this job. I have 1 week before I lose my room, and there are no other opportunities in town. I can do whatever you need done, and I will do it well." Something in Grant's expression shifted, a flicker of respect crossing his features. "The pay would not be much to start. Room and board included, plus $20 a month until we see how things work out. There is a small cabin behind the main house that my mother used for her weaving before she passed. It needs cleaning, but it is sound and has a good stove." $20 a month was less than she had made at the mine, but with room and board included, she could actually save money. More importantly, she would have a roof over her head and meaningful work. "When can I start?" "How about right now? You can see if the cabin suits you, and if it does, you can move in whenever you are ready." Grant opened the fence gate. "Fair warning, though. My brother Tobias is the charming one. I am just the one who gets things done." Florence followed him across the yard toward the back of the property. The ranch was larger than it had appeared from the road, with multiple barns, several paddocks, and a main house that looked well-maintained if somewhat plain. The cabin Grant showed her was small but clean, with one main room that served as both living space and bedroom, and a tiny kitchen area with a good iron stove. A separate door led to a storage room that could serve as an office. "It is perfect," Florence said, and she meant it. The cabin was more than she had hoped for, a private space where she could build a new life. "Then I will see you on Monday morning," Grant said. "Bring whatever records and ledgers you think you will need. I will show you around the operation and introduce you to the hands we have working here. Most of them are decent men, but if anyone gives you trouble, you come directly to me." "Understood," Florence nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. She had solved the immediate problem of employment and housing, but she was stepping into an entirely unknown world. She knew nothing about horses or ranching, and she would be living and working in close proximity to men she did not know. It was not the future she had planned, but it was a future nonetheless. The next few days passed in a blur of packing her meager possessions and saying goodbye to the few acquaintances she had in town. Mrs. Patterson seemed relieved that Florence had found respectable employment, and she even helped carry Florence's trunk down to the wagon Grant sent to collect her belongings. On Monday morning, Florence put on her most practical dress, tied her dark hair back in a simple bun, and presented herself at the main ranch house just after dawn. Grant was already awake, standing on the porch with a cup of coffee in his hand. "You are punctual," he observed. "That is good. We start early around here." He spent the morning showing her around the ranch, introducing her to the various horses and explaining his breeding program. Florence listened carefully, taking notes in a small journal she had brought. Grant had a clear vision for what he wanted to achieve, but as he had said, the execution was haphazard at best. Records were kept on scraps of paper, tucked into books, or simply remembered. Bills of sale were stuffed in drawers, and receipts were mixed in with personal correspondence. "This is worse than I thought," Florence said frankly as they stood in the ranch office, looking at the chaos of papers spread across an old desk. Grant had the grace to look embarrassed. "I told you we needed help. You need a miracle, Mr. Keller." But Florence was already sorting papers into piles, her mind organizing the information into categories. "How many horses do you currently own?" "Approximately 45, give or take." "Give or take is not an acceptable answer in business, Mr. Keller. We need exact numbers." Florence found a clean ledger book in a drawer and opened it to the first page. "We are going to start from the beginning. You are going to show me every horse on this property, and I am going to record its name, age, sex, lineage if known, and current value. Then we are going to do the same with every piece of tack, every wagon, every building, and every asset this ranch owns. It will take us several days, but when we are done, you will know exactly what you have and what it is worth." Grant stared at her for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile, and it transformed his whole appearance. "I think I made a very good decision hiring you, Miss Garrison. I hope you still think so when you see how much work this is going to require, Mr. Keller." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Florence spent her days transforming the chaos of the ranch records into an organized system, while Grant worked with the horses and managed the daily operations. He was patient with her questions, explaining the intricacies of horse breeding and training in ways she could understand and document. In turn, she began to educate him on basic business principles, showing him how to track expenses against income and identify which aspects of the operation were most profitable. As November gave way to December, Florence found herself genuinely enjoying the work. The ranch was peaceful in a way the mine office had never been, and despite the cold, she appreciated the chance to spend time outdoors. She discovered she had a natural affinity for horses, and several of them would come to the fence when they saw her approaching, hoping for the apple pieces she had started carrying in her pockets. Grant noticed her growing comfort around the animals. One crisp morning, he saddled a gentle mare named Daisy and led her to where Florence was checking inventory in one of the barns. "You know how to ride?" he asked. Florence shook her head. "I never had the opportunity to learn." "Then it is time you did. If you are going to manage a horse ranch, you should know what it feels like to be on one." He offered her the reins. "Daisy here is about the sweetest horse we have. She teaches all the children around here how to ride." "I am not sure this is a good idea," Florence said, but she found herself reaching for the reins anyway. Grant helped her into the saddle, his hands steadying her with professional efficiency, though Florence could not help but notice the warmth of his touch through her sleeve. He adjusted the stirrups to fit her shorter legs and then swung up onto his own horse with effortless grace. "Just relax and move with her. Daisy will follow my horse, so you do not need to do much. Trust her, and she will take care of you." They rode out across the ranch property at a gentle walk. Florence gripped the saddle horn tightly at first, but as she grew accustomed to the rhythm of the horse's movement, she began to relax. The world looked different from horseback, bigger and more open, and she understood suddenly why Grant seemed so at home in the saddle. "You are a natural," Grant called over to her. "Most people are tense for their first few rides, but you are reading her movement." "I am terrified," Florence admitted, but she was smiling. Being scared and being incompetent are two different things. "You are doing fine." They rode for almost an hour, circling the property and stopping occasionally, so Grant could point out landmarks or explain his plans for expanding certain pastures. When they finally returned to the barn, Florence dismounted with Grant's help, her legs shaky but her spirits high. "Thank you," she said. "That was remarkable. We will make a horsewoman of you yet, Miss Garrison." Grant's eyes held a warmth that made something flutter in Florence's chest, a feeling she quickly pushed away. He was her employer, and she could not afford to complicate the only stable situation she had. December brought bitter cold and occasional snow. Florence's cabin proved to be well insulated, and the stove kept it comfortable even on the coldest nights. She fell into a routine of waking before dawn, preparing a simple breakfast, and then making her way to the ranch office to work on the accounts. Grant usually appeared mid-morning to discuss any business matters, and they would spend an hour or two going over numbers and making plans. Florence began to see patterns in the records she was organizing. Certain bloodlines consistently produced horses that sold for higher prices. Buyers from specific regions were more reliable in their payments. Some expenses, like grain purchased from a supplier 2 towns over, were significantly higher than they needed to be. "You are paying too much for feed," she told Grant one morning, pointing to the figures in her ledger. "This supplier is charging you 20% more than the market rate. If we purchased from the mill in Yankton instead, we could save over $100 a year." Grant leaned over her shoulder to look at the numbers, so close she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather. "I have been buying from them for 2 years. How did I not notice this?" "Because you were not tracking it properly. That is why you hired me." Florence tried to ignore the way her heart had started beating faster with him standing so near. "I can draft a letter to the Yankton mill if you would like, inquiring about their rates and delivery schedules." "You really do have a gift for this," Grant said quietly. In just 2 months, you have organized this operation better than Tobias and I managed in 2 years. Florence felt her cheeks warm at the praise. I am just doing my job, Mr. Keller. You are doing far more than that, and I think we have been working together long enough that you can call me Grant. We are not so formal out here on the ranch. Then you should call me Florence. She looked up at him, suddenly very aware of how little distance separated them. The moment stretched out, charged with something unspoken, before Grant cleared his throat and stepped back. I should get back to the horses. Tobias is supposed to be returning tomorrow with the new stock, and I need to make sure we have space ready in the north barn. After he left, Florence sat for a long moment, staring at the ledger without really seeing it. She had been so focused on rebuilding her life and proving her competence that she had not allowed herself to think about Grant Keller as anything other than her employer. But the truth was, she had come to look forward to their morning meetings. She appreciated his dry humor, his dedication to his work, and the way he treated her as an equal partner in the business rather than just an employee. She shook her head firmly. She could not afford to develop feelings for Grant. Her position here was still new and potentially fragile. If she made things awkward by revealing an attraction he did not share, she could lose everything she had built. Better to keep things professional and guard her heart carefully. Tobias Keller arrived the next afternoon with 15 new horses and a personality that was as big as the Dakota sky. Where Grant was quiet and reserved, Tobias was loud and charming, greeting Florence with a sweeping bow and an outrageous compliment about her eyes. "So you are the miracle worker my brother has been writing about," Tobias said, his grin infectious. "He says you have turned this place into a proper business." "I have simply organized the records," Florence replied, though she could not help but smile at his enthusiasm. "Your brother and you have built an impressive operation." "We have built a chaotic operation that somehow makes money despite our best efforts to confuse ourselves," Tobias corrected. "But Grant says that is changing, thanks to you. I cannot wait to see these famous ledgers he keeps talking about." Over the next few days, Florence caught Tobias up on the business situation and explained the new systems she had implemented. He was quick to understand and surprisingly insightful about the market conditions in the regions he had been traveling through. Together, they developed a plan for targeting specific buyers who were looking for the type of horses the Keller Ranch specialized in breeding. Florence noticed that Grant seemed different when his brother was around. He smiled more easily and engaged in the kind of casual banter that spoke of a close relationship. She also noticed the way Tobias would look between her and Grant with a speculative gleam in his eye, as if he was seeing something that interested him. One evening, Florence was working late in the office, finishing up the monthly accounts by lamplight. She heard boots on the porch and looked up to find Grant in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I saw your light still on and thought you could use this," he said, offering her one of the cups. "You have been working since dawn. The numbers will still be there tomorrow." Florence accepted the coffee gratefully. "I wanted to finish the quarterly report before the end of the week." "You and Tobias should see exactly where you stand financially before you make any major decisions about next year." Grant settled into the chair across from her desk. "Tobias thinks we should expand, take on more breeding stock and hire additional trainers. What do you think?" "I think your brother has excellent instincts for the market, but you need to be careful about overextending. You have the capital to support modest expansion, but if you grow too quickly and have a bad year, you could find yourself in real trouble." Florence pulled out her ledger and turned it so he could see her projections. "I have run several scenarios. This one here shows conservative growth that you can sustain even if sales drop by 20%. This one shows aggressive growth that could significantly increase your profits, but would leave you vulnerable to market fluctuations. Grant studied the numbers carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. You really have thought this through. It is my job to think it through. You and Tobias focus on the horses. I focus on the business. We make a good team, Grant said, looking up from the ledger to meet her eyes. I do not think I realized how much we needed someone like you until you were here. I do not think I realized how much I would enjoy this work until I was doing it, Florence admitted. When I lost my job at the mine, I thought my life was over, but this feels more meaningful somehow. The mine was just about extracting ore and making money for Pritchard. This is about building something that will last. That is exactly how I feel about it. Grant leaned back in his chair. My father was a ranch hand his whole life, never owned anything of his own. He told Tobias and me that the most important thing a man could do was build something that would outlast him. This ranch is our way of doing that. They talked long into the night, the conversation ranging from business plans to childhood memories to dreams for the future. Florence learned that Grant's mother had died when he was 16, forcing him to grow up quickly and take care of Tobias, who was 6 years younger. She told him about her parents and the loneliness of being orphaned young, of the constant struggle to maintain respectability while having no one to depend on. I understand why you work so hard, Grant said quietly. You are building security for yourself, the way Tobias and I are building this ranch. We all need something solid to stand on. Exactly. Florence was surprised by how well he understood. Most people saw her dedication as excessive or unfeminine, but Grant recognized it for what it was: survival. When Florence finally returned to her cabin that night, she lay awake thinking about Grant's words. The walls she had carefully constructed around her heart were beginning to crack, and she was not sure she could stop it from happening. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into a quieter rhythm. Training was limited in the coldest months, so Grant and Tobias focused on maintenance and planning for the spring season. Florence continued to refine the business systems, and she began teaching Tobias basic bookkeeping so that he could maintain records when he was traveling. Christmas arrived, and to Florence's surprise, the Keller brothers invited her to spend the day at the main house. Tobias had somehow procured a scraggly pine tree, which they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. It was a simple celebration, but it was the warmest Christmas Florence had experienced since her parents died. Grant gave her a pair of leather gloves lined with rabbit fur, perfect for the cold morning walks between her cabin and the office. I noticed your old ones were wearing through, he said, almost shyly. Florence had made each of the brothers a new shirt, having noticed that their work clothes were becoming threadbare. It was a practical gift, but she had taken care to make them well, with even stitches and reinforced seams. These are fine work, Grant said, running his hand over the fabric. Thank you, Florence. This is very thoughtful. The way he said her name made her chest feel tight. She was definitely in trouble where Grant Keller was concerned. As winter gave way to early spring, the ranch became busy again. Buyers started arriving to look at the yearlings, and Grant and Tobias were occupied with training and sales. Florence managed the contracts and financial transactions, ensuring that everything was properly documented and paid. One buyer, a rough man named Saunders from Montana, tried to negotiate a lower price by claiming one of the horses had a fault that Florence knew did not exist. She stood her ground in the negotiations, pointing out the horse's excellent bloodlines and training, and refused to budge on the price. You are letting a woman handle your business, Saunders said to Grant with a sneer. That is no way to run a ranch. Miss Garrison is my business manager and she speaks with my full authority, Grant replied, his voice cold. "If you do not like it, you are free to take your business elsewhere." Saunders looked between them, clearly calculating whether he could find comparable stock at another ranch. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Fine. I will pay your price." After he left with his horses, Grant found Florence in the office. "Thank you for standing firm on that. He was testing you and you did not back down." "I know what our horses are worth," Florence said simply. "I will not let anyone cheat us." "Us," Grant repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Florence felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Tobias burst into the office with news that one of their best mares was about to foal. They all rushed to the barn, where they spent the next several hours monitoring the birth. Florence had never witnessed anything like it before, the raw power and vulnerability of the process, and she was amazed when the foal finally emerged, all long legs and curiosity. "That is incredible," she whispered, watching the newborn struggle to stand. "It never gets old," Grant said. He was standing close beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "This is why we do what we do. Every foal is a new beginning, a chance to create something exceptional." The foal finally managed to stand, and Florence laughed with delight. When she turned to share the moment with Grant, she found him watching her instead of the horses. The expression on his face made her breath catch, tenderness and longing mixed with something that looked like fear. "Florence," he began, but Tobias chose that moment to clap his brother on the shoulder and launch into a detailed analysis of the foal's conformation. The moment passed, but Florence felt it lingering between them, a question waiting to be asked. May brought warm weather and the busiest season of the ranch year. They had horses in various stages of training, buyers visiting almost daily, and the constant work of maintaining the property. Florence was often up before dawn and working until well after dark. One evening, she was in the office going over a particularly complicated contract when Grant appeared in the doorway. He looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from good, productive work. "It is past midnight," he said. "You should get some sleep. I want to finish reviewing this contract before the buyer arrives tomorrow." Florence rubbed her eyes, trying to focus on the legal language. Grant crossed the room and gently took the papers from her hands. "It will wait until morning. You have been running yourself ragged for weeks. When was the last time you took a full day off?" "I do not need days off. I need to ensure this ranch succeeds." "Florence." Grant crouched down beside her chair so they were at eye level. "This ranch will succeed because you have already set up systems that work. One night of rest is not going to undo all of that. You cannot pour from an empty cup." She wanted to argue, but the concern in his eyes stopped her. When had anyone last cared whether she was tired or overworked? When had anyone looked at her the way Grant was looking at her now, as if she mattered beyond what she could do for them? "Perhaps you are right," she conceded softly. "I will walk you back to your cabin." Grant offered his hand to help her up, and Florence took it. His palm was warm and calloused from years of ranch work, and she was very aware of the strength in his fingers as they closed around hers. They walked in comfortable silence across the yard. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered across the sky like scattered diamonds. Florence's cabin was dark, and she realized she had forgotten to leave a lamp burning before she left that morning. "Wait here," Grant said. "Let me light a lamp for you before you go in." He disappeared inside, and a moment later, warm light bloomed in the window. When Florence entered, she found him standing by her small table, looking oddly uncertain. "Grant, is something wrong?" "No, yes, maybe." He removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "Florence, I need to talk to you about something, and I am probably going to do a terrible job of it." Her heart started pounding. All right. When I hired you back in November, I thought I was solving a business problem, and you did solve it. You have done more for this ranch than Tobias, and I could have managed in 5 years on our own. But somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about business for me. He met her eyes, his own filled with vulnerability. I look forward to our morning meetings more than anything else in my day. I find excuses to come to the office just to see you. When that buyer insulted you, I wanted to throw him off the property. And every night, I lie awake wishing your cabin was not so far from the main house. Florence could hardly breathe. Grant, let me finish, please, before I lose my nerve. I know this is probably improper. You work for me, and I do not want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. But I cannot keep pretending that I think of you only as my business manager. Somewhere between the ledgers and the morning coffee and teaching you to ride, I fell in love with you, Florence Garrison. And I needed you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way. The words hung in the air between them. Florence felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness but from overwhelming relief. You fell in love with me, completely and hopelessly. I thought I was the only one feeling this way, Florence said, her voice shaking. I have been trying so hard not to let it show, not to let my feelings complicate things. I did not want to lose this job or this place or my friendship with you. Hope blazed across Grant's face. Are you saying? I am saying that I fell in love with you too. I think it started that first day when you offered me work without making me beg for it. Or maybe it was when you taught me to ride and trusted me enough to let me be afraid. Or possibly it was one of those long nights when we talked about our dreams and you actually listened to mine. She stepped closer to him. I have never had anyone in my life who saw me as a partner, someone worth trusting and respecting. You gave me that, Grant. You gave me a future when mine had disappeared. Grant closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. Can I kiss you? Yes, Florence whispered. His lips met hers softly at first, tentative and questioning. Florence answered by wrapping her arms around his neck and kissing him back with all the emotion she had been holding in for months. The kiss deepened, becoming something hungry and hopeful and absolutely right. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. I have wanted to do that for months, Grant said, his forehead resting against hers. I have wanted you to, Florence admitted. They spent the next hour talking, sitting close together on the small sofa in her cabin, sharing all the small moments when their feelings had grown. Grant told her about the day he realized he was in love with her. She had been in one of the paddocks, laughing as a foal investigated her pockets for treats, and the sight of her joy had hit him like a physical blow. Florence confessed that she had known she was in trouble the night they talked until dawn in the office, when she had seen past his reserved exterior to the caring, thoughtful man underneath. What happens now? Florence asked. I mean, with us and the ranch and everything. Now I court you properly, Grant said firmly. I take you to dinner in town and I bring you flowers, and I do all the things a man should do when he is serious about a woman. And when enough time has passed that no one can say I rushed you, I am going to ask you to marry me. Florence's heart soared. That seems like an excellent plan. You are not worried about what people will say. A woman working on a ranch, living in a cabin unchaperoned and now courting her employer, let them talk. I stopped caring about society's expectations when I realized they were not going to feed me or shelter me or give me any kind of future. I make my own choices now and I choose you. Grant kissed her again, slow and sweet. I choose you too, Florence. I will always choose you. The next morning, Tobias took one look at his brother's face and started laughing. Finally, I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in a room together to force you to admit your feelings. You knew? Grant asked. Everyone knew except apparently the two of you. The hands have had a betting pool going since January about when you would finally say something." Tobias grinned at Florence. "Welcome to the family, almost sister. I look forward to watching you continue to organize my brother's life." As spring turned to summer, Grant courted Florence with a determination that matched everything else he did. He took her on long rides across the prairie, showing her the wild beauty of the Dakota landscape. They had dinner at Yankton's modest hotel restaurant, ignoring the curious stares of townspeople who remembered Florence from her mine office days. Grant brought her wildflowers, not because they were romantic, but because he knew she loved the bright colors against the endless green of the grassland. Florence continued to manage the ranch business, but now she did it as Grant's partner in every sense. They made decisions together, planned together, and built together. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, gaining a reputation not just for quality horses, but for honest dealing and professional management. In late August, Grant took Florence to a spot along the Missouri River where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water ran clear and cool. They had packed a picnic, and after they ate, Grant produced a small box from his pocket. "I know I said I would wait longer, but I cannot," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small blue stone. "This was my mother's ring. She would have loved you, Florence. You have her same strength and determination. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Florence said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Grant slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. They kissed under the cottonwoods while the river flowed past, marking the beginning of their new life together. They were married in September in Yankton's small church, with Tobias as best man and Mrs. Patterson, Florence's former landlady, standing up with her. It was a simple ceremony, but Florence had never been happier. She wore a blue dress she had sewn herself, and Grant wore a new suit that made him look slightly uncomfortable but undeniably handsome. After the wedding, they returned to the ranch that was now truly theirs together. Grant had expanded Florence's cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a larger kitchen. It was not a grand house, but it was home, filled with light and promise. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. A harsh winter tested their resources, but Florence's careful financial planning meant they had reserves to weather the difficulties. In spring, 2 of their best mares produced exceptional foals that would become foundation stock for the ranch's future reputation. Florence discovered she was pregnant in May, and Grant's joy was so genuine and complete that it made her cry happy tears. Their son was born in January of 1885, during a snowstorm that seemed determined to prove Dakota winters had not grown any gentler. They named him Matthew, after Florence's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's green-brown eyes. Grant was an attentive father, often carrying the baby with him on morning chores, talking to him about horses and ranching as if he could understand every word. Tobias, who had taken over more of the traveling aspects of the business, was a devoted uncle. He brought Matthew presents from every trip and declared that the baby would grow up to be the finest horseman in the territory. The ranch continued to grow in reputation and prosperity. Florence's management systems became more sophisticated as the operation expanded, and she trained several young men from town in basic bookkeeping so that the ranch would not be dependent on any single person. She still kept the final accounts herself, though, enjoying the meditative quality of balancing numbers and tracking the ranch's success. In the spring of 1886, Florence learned she was pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and she continued working almost until the day their daughter was born in November. They named her Clara, after Grant's mother, and she was a bright-eyed, curious baby who seemed determined to keep her parents awake at all hours. "We have built something good here," Florence said one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching Matthew, now almost 2, play in the yard while Clara slept in her cradle beside them. "When I think about where I was 3 years ago, standing at that flooded mine with no future at all, it feels like another lifetime." "You would have found a way forward," Grant said, his arm around her shoulders. "You are too determined and too capable to have been defeated permanently." "Maybe. But I am glad I did not have to find out. I am glad I found this ranch and this life and you." Florence leaned into his warmth. "You gave me more than a job when you hired me that day. You gave me a partnership, a purpose, and eventually a family. You helped me find a different future than the one I had planned, and it turned out to be so much better than I ever imagined." "We helped each other," Grant corrected. "You saved this ranch as much as I saved you. We made this life together." As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, Florence reflected on the truth of his words. The mine flooding had seemed like a disaster, the end of all her carefully laid plans. But it had actually been a beginning, forcing her to step away from the safe and predictable and take a chance on something entirely new. She had arrived at the Keller ranch with nothing but desperation and determination. Now she had a husband she loved deeply, 2 beautiful children, a business she had helped build, and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibilities. The cowboy who had offered her work that cold November day had indeed helped her find a different future, but together they had created something neither could have achieved alone. Years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Matthew grew into a serious boy who loved horses as much as his father did, spending hours in the barns watching Grant work. Clara proved to have her mother's head for numbers, often helping Florence with the accounts by scribbling in old ledgers with bits of pencil. In 1888, Florence gave birth to another son, Thomas, who seemed to arrive with a perpetual smile on his face. Tobias, who had married a woman from Omaha the previous year, brought his wife Anna to live at the ranch in a house they built on the eastern section of the property. Anna and Florence became close friends, and it was good for the children to have cousins nearby. The ranch expanded to include over 200 acres, and the Keller name became synonymous with quality horses throughout the region. Buyers came from as far as Texas and Montana, knowing they would find excellent stock and honest dealing. Florence had developed such a sophisticated record-keeping system that they could trace the lineage and performance history of every horse they had ever bred. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Grant surprised Florence with a trip to Chicago. It was the first time either of them had been to a major city, and they marveled at the buildings, the crowds, and the sheer pace of urban life. But after a week, they were both eager to return home to the ranch and their children. "I am glad we saw it," Florence said on the train ride back to Yankton. "But I realized something while we were there. Everything I need and want is already at the ranch. The city is exciting, but it is not home." "I felt exactly the same way," Grant admitted. "Though I did enjoy watching your face when you saw the department stores." Florence laughed. "They were impressive, but I would rather have our life than all the department stores in the world." As they pulled into Yankton's train,